alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. May Allah peace and mercy be upon all of you. Tena koto katua. Ko Hebron ti Monga, ko Jordan ti Awa, ko Tamimi tuko iwi, ko Jalal tuko hapu, no Palestine and New Zealand aho, ko mai tuko ingwa. Once again, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Mai Tamimi, and I have the privilege to be facilitating this webinar today and been invited by the organizations organizing this webinar today. So I will try to do a quick introduction, and then before that, I'll start with the Karakia, then a quick introduction because we want to make the most use of this time today, being together, and then we'll move to our speakers. So I'll start with the Karakia. Kia hora te marino, kia whakapapa punamo te moana, he horahi ma tato I te rangi nei, aroha atu, aroha mai, tato e a tato katua. May peace be widespread. May the sea be like greenstone, a pathway for us all this day. Give love, receive love. Let us show respect for each other. Welcome everyone who's joining us today from around the country. I'm here based in Dunedin, and something about me, I've been involved in the Interfaith Dialogue for 13 years on and off, so I'm doing this currently in my personal capacity. Just a little bit of context about Children of Abraham Annual Conversation 2021. Children of Abraham, set up in 2019, is the initiative of the Pearl of Islands Foundation as a Muslim representative, Beit Shalom Progressive Synagogue for Jewish representation, and the Holy Trinity Anglican Cathedral for the Christian one. The aim of this initiative is to promote interfaith understanding and cooperation between members of the three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, by holding annual panel discussions. The hosting of the panel rotates, and this year's host is the Pearl of Islands Foundation. The key issues that are normally discussed in those webinars are the following, but not limited to the following. Sacred story of binding of Isaac in Jewish, Christian, and Muslim traditions, introduction into scriptures, parts, formats, etc., ways of reading scriptures, and how does your way of reading scriptures affect your faith life? So the Interfaith Dialogue has been really an issue and a topic that many New Zealanders nowadays, they like to take part in, and they would like to seek more information about, and they would like to be more involved in. I'm not going to take much longer in terms of introducing the webinar. I would like to ask Naomi Johnson, please, if she could introduce the Jewish speaker today. The floor is yours, Naomi, please.
Certainly. It is my pleasure to introduce Paul Wilton as our Jewish speaker. Paul is a long-term member of the Beth Shalom Progressive Synagogue since he and his wife arrived here from South Africa some 30 years ago. He has served as president and treasurer on the board and held other key roles both for our synagogue and in the wider Jewish community. Paul has represented Judaism on the Auckland Interfaith Council since 2016. He is a strong proponent of interfaith, believing it enriches our lives to learn about the different faiths, customs, and cultures of others. In particular, he values the friendships that he and his wife Wendy have made through these activities. Over to you, Paul.
Assalamu alaikum, kia ora, kato katoa, and greetings to you all. Thank you for the introduction, Naomi, and thanks also to the Pearl of the Island Foundation for inviting me to speak at tonight's event. I'll be speaking from a Jewish perspective. It's fair to point out I'm merely a congregant of our Beth Shalom synagogue. Other than preparing for my bar mitzvah, not so long after Abraham was a lad, I've had no formal training in religion. Now, the mention of bar mitzvah leads us straight into the heart of tonight's topic. Bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah translate respectively into son and daughter of the commandments. The Torah, or 5 books of Moses, is the first part of the Jewish Bible. It contains the early history of our people and the written law, including 613 mitzvot, or commandments, of which 248 are positive, do's, and 365 negative commandments. I remember 365 by thinking that there's one thing I should not do each day. But of course, it does not work that way. From our weekly prayer book, here's a passage by Rabbi Chaim Stern. Torah is the record of the spiritual journey of the Jewish people and the lessons for life and conduct we have learned on that journey. It is teaching, law, tradition. It's the fruit of reason and the outpouring of the Spirit in every age. It is interpretation of text and innovation of thought. Torah is the call for righteousness, justice, and equity, viewed as the divine will, and it is the response of each generation to the changing conditions of life. It's the ideas and ideals that make up our religious heritage. It's what God has revealed to us and what we have come to know of God. Now, there's a distinction in Judaism between Torah and the Torah. The Torah refers to the 5 books, Bereshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Devarim, known by many respectively as Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. When referring to Torah, however, Jewish scholars are often referring to the totality of Jewish teaching, culture, and practice, whether derived from biblical texts or later rabbinic writings. So let's look at the holy Jewish scriptures and sources that guide Jewish practice. We call our Bible the Tanakh. This is an acronym made up of the first letter of each of the 3 main parts. The T in Tanakh comes from Torah, or 5 books of Moses. N represents Nevi'im, or prophets, from Joshua to Malachi. And lastly, Ketuvim, or writings, from Psalms, Proverbs, and Job through to the 2nd book of Chronicles. In short, what many may call the Old Testament, we call the Tanakh, and that is our Bible. Our holy scriptures don't end there. For many centuries, rabbinic interpretation and discussion on the written law set out in the Torah was passed down by mouth from one generation to the next, keeping alive our oral tradition. Between the 2nd and 5th centuries of the Common Era, these were documented in 2 parts to form the Talmud. The Talmud consists of the Mishnah, or oral law, and the Gemara, with commentaries on the Mishnah. While the Torah tells us what the commandments are, the Talmud explains the commandments and tells us how to carry them out, forming the basis for Orthodox Jewish observance, or halakha, translated as the way. While discussing sacred texts and sources, one cannot ignore midrashim and later commentaries. A midrash is a particular form of interpretation of Torah, and there are many midrashim. Genesis Rabbah is one such example, written in the 4th century of the Common Era. Its style is described by Sefaria.org as clear and simple, and it covers most of the book of Genesis with verse by verse and often word by word commentary. Ask almost any Jew about the story of Abraham and his father's idol, his idol shop. And you're likely to hear how the lad smashed his father's idols and placed the weapon of destruction in the hand of the largest idol. Actually, the Torah tells us almost nothing about Abraham's childhood, and this story appears nowhere in the Bible. Instead, it's documented in the 4th century Midrash, Genesis Rabbah, and I believe that Islam teaches a similar story. For understanding and guidance on Holy Scriptures, we rely very heavily on the work and views of later rabbis, including the 11th century Rabbi Shlomo ben Yitzchak, referred to commonly as Rashi, and the 12th century Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, also known as Maimonides, but often referred to in religious discussions as Rambam. So typically, when studying text, we may ask, what does Rashi say? Or what does Rambam say about a particular point? Incidentally, Maimonides studied at the University of the Al Qarawiyyin in Fez, Morocco, a leading Muslim spiritual and educational center, described as the oldest university in the world. One last source that must be mentioned is the Shulchan Aruch, or set table, which was written in the 16th century by Rabbi Yosef Karo and is the current definitive authority on halakha, or modern Orthodox Jewish observance. So, starting with Torah, prophets and writings, as our Bible, the codified oral law with its commentaries in the Talmud, supported by Midrashim with their detailed interpretation, sometimes word by word, of Torah, followed by the work of great rabbis, and finally the Shulchan Aruch as the set table. We have touched not on every single source, but the basis for a good grounding in Jewish law and practical observance, or halakha, which guides the day-to-day life of an observant Orthodox Jew. You'll notice that I've been talking about Orthodox Jewish observance. There are three main streams of Judaism, and many sects within these streams, as there are in most religions where differences have emerged through communities being scattered around the world. The three streams are Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. Beth Shalom, to which I belong, is the Progressive Jewish Congregation of Auckland, part of the Reform or Liberal stream of Judaism. At a very basic level, Orthodox Judaism teaches that every word of Torah comes directly from God, and that the rabbinic interpretations and commentaries carry about as much weight as the Torah itself. Conservative is similar, but differs in the roles assigned to women. The Reform, Liberal, and Progressive streams teach that our scriptures were compiled by humans under divine inspiration. We are still required to study and be aware of our tradition, and when we come to assess what law applies to any situation, our rabbis will refer to the traditional texts and commentaries. All streams of Judaism encourage interpretation, and within any stream, not all rabbis will necessarily agree with one another. An Orthodox friend once said to me that to discard or disagree with any word of Torah is to reject the authority of the Torah itself, which to him would be tantamount to rejecting God's word. This is not the way it's seen by Progressive Judaism. There are differences in the way that we practice our faith, but this is also changing. So less than 10 years ago, we could say that while Conservative and Progressive Judaism ordained women as rabbis, Orthodox Judaism did not. In recent years, however, modern Orthodox years ordained some women rabbis, indicating a willingness to change within certain parameters. We've touched the main Jewish scriptures and sources. Let's turn now to the way that we read and study them. Jewish congregations read the Torah in religious services according to an annual cycle. The Torah is divided into 54 portions, and each week we read a portion, or occasionally a double portion. Every portion, or parashah in Hebrew, has a name, that is often taken from the first word or near the beginning of the portion. When reading, studying, or discussing a passage, we'll often refer to the name of the parasha instead of the book, chapter, and verse. Each year, at the festival of Simchat Torah, which took place this year at the end of September, we celebrate the end of the annual cycle and beginning of the new cycle for the year to come. As soon as we finish the Torah, we rise and declare and repeat, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek, be strong, and we will strengthen one another. And then immediately start reading again from the beginning to signify the continuity of the Torah. It's a bit like painting the Golden Gate Bridge. For every week, there's a designated Torah portion. We refer to it in Hebrew as Parashah HaShavua, which means portion of the week. And in any given week, Jewish congregations throughout the world read or chant the same portion. Similarly, for each week, there's another reading known as the Haftarah, taken from the prophets. The passage is chosen as having some link with the associated Parashah HaShavua, Torah portion of the week. Reading the Torah is particularly challenging for non-Hebrew speakers because the scrolls are written without any vowels, cantillation marks like musical notation, or punctuation. When learning to read a portion, non-Hebrew speakers will learn the passage from a text that has vowels and punctuation, and many find that laning or chanting the passage makes it easier to learn. This is how we read scriptures as a community. We also have set texts that apply to festivals such as the Book of Esther from Ketuvim, which is read at Purim and Kohelet, or Ecclesiastes, which is studied on Sukkot, the Festival of the Tabernacles. Passages from the scriptures appear throughout a weekly prayer book, and Psalms are read to people who are nearing the end of life and at funerals. It's important to mention that when studying Torah, one must consider the Torah in its entirety. Any question must be considered in context and bearing in mind what we know from the rest of our teachings. This is how the scholars are able to distinguish between what is to be taken literally and what is apocryphal. We've been asked to mention what we call the Akedah, it's the binding of Isaac. The story where God instructs Abraham to sacrifice his son appears in the Torah portion Vayera, which is the first word of the parasha, and it means, and he appeared, because God appeared to Abraham. Before looking at this, let's go back a bit. There is the fourth parasha of the annual cycle. The first parasha is Bereshit, in the beginning, where we read of the story of creation. The second portion is Noach, or Noah. Guess who that story is about? Interestingly, it's at the end of Parashat Noach, the second reading of the cycle, where we encounter Abraham and his father Terah for the first time. If I'm not mistaken, Terah is referred to in the Greek Christian Bible, Luke 3:34, as an ancestor of Jesus called Terah, and the father of Azar in the Quran. Abraham is recognized as the founding father of the Jewish people. He was born in Mesopotamia, and is believed to have lived in the early Bronze Age some 4,000 years or more ago. At the time, people worshipped idols, and Abraham broke the mold, one could say literally, turning to the worship of a single God that is now shared by the Abrahamic faith. Worship of a single God that is now shared by the Abrahamic faith. He was born Abram, meaning exalted father in Hebrew. But God changed the name of Abraham, meaning father of a multitude of nations. And here this evening we have Christians, Muslims, and Jews who all trace our roots back to Abraham, our connecting father in faith. The name change occurs in the third parasha, Lech Lecha, after God instructs Abram, get out of your country, away from your kindred and from your father's house, and go to the land that I will show you. In this third reading, the angel of God comes to Hagar and tells her that she will have a son who must be called Ishmael, and that his seed will be greatly multiplied, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. Abraham settles in the land of Canaan, and at 86, when Ishmael is born, he's 86 when Ishmael is born. At 99, Abraham enters into the covenant with God and is circumcised. This brings us to Vayera, the fourth parasha. Vayera is one of the longest parashot in the Torah, and there's much to it. Abraham at 99 is recovering from his circumcision. God appears while he sits at the door of his tent. 3 strangers visit him in the heat of the day in the desert. They say that Sarah will have a son. The strangers turn out to be angels, but Abraham doesn't know that at this time. When they say that Sarah will have a son, she's 89 years old and laughs. Abraham bargains with God to save 2 cities, but they're destroyed anyway. And Abraham's nephew Lot and his wife flee, and she's turned into a pillar of salt for disobeying an order not to look back at the burning cities. In the same parasha, Isaac is born and circumcised. Hagar and Ishmael are banished from the household, and God hears Ishmael's cry in the desert and saves them by showing Hagar a well where they can drink water. It is then that God tests Abraham by asking him to sacrifice his son. In the absence of a rabbi in our synagogue, it's customary for our synagogue for a congregant to give a short Torah synopsis on the Friday evening service, and for someone else to give one on the Saturday morning when the Torah portion is read. We choose a section from the parasha that speaks to us and discuss the message that it conveys. 3 weeks ago, when we were to read the Torah portion that contains the story of the sacrifice, we had 2 such talks, one on Friday and one on Saturday, but neither mentioned the sacrifice. Both speakers spoke in different ways about the lessons that could be learned from Abraham's eager and unconditional hospitality. If I were asked to provide a talk specifically about the Akedah, i.e. the binding of Isaac, here are some points I would include. The Torah portion is full of challenging passages. These tend to keep people interested in and engaged. This Torah is filled with challenging passages, and this is one, and it gives rise to heaps of questions. How could a loving father be prepared to sacrifice his son to prove a point? I would argue in this case that God had already won Abraham's trust and had made promises about Isaac's future. Abraham knew this was a test, and I choose to believe that he did not think for a minute that God would actually make him go through with it. What about how this affected the relationship between Abraham and his son, or Abraham and his wife, Sarah, who had waited until she was 90 to have a child? In preparation for such a talk, I would ask, what does Rashi say about this or that? What about Rambam? What of the Midrash, Genesis, Rabbah? In any event, it would be a topic that would fill another talk. And finally, we've been asked how our reading of scriptures affects our own lives. When my oldest son became bar mitzvah, I said as I presented him with a prayer shawl, throughout your life, you will be faced with moral decisions on how to behave. You could do a lot worse than looking first to the Torah and our Jewish teachings. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul, for this contribution. Before I would call for the introduction for our next speaker, I would like to share with everyone who's with us tonight or this evening, is that you could, if you have any question as we go, please write it down in the chat so we can attend to when it comes to the part for questions and answers. And now I would like to ask Ivetsa Gregretz if he could please introduce the Christian speaker, Dr. Sarah Hart.
Thank you very much. My tena koto katoa, shalom haverim, erev tov, and assalamu alaikum. Nice greetings to all of you who are joining us on behalf of all of us here in, well, virtual Holy Trinity Cathedral in Purnell. It is my special privilege and blessing to introduce Dr. Sarah Hart, who lectures biblical studies at Te Kupena Catholic Theological College, the Catholic tertiary education provider in Aotearoa, New Zealand. So for us Christians, this talk this evening, it's not only interreligious and interfaith, but we have also our internal dimension of intra-Christian dialogue between Anglicans and Catholics. So it is a great joy for me that we can do that. Sarah's earliest formal theology studies were at the Diocesan Theology Center in Vienna, Austria, where she pursued postgraduate music studies in the early 1980s. She has a doctorate from the University of Divinity in Melbourne, Australia, and is a member of several national and international biblical associations. For 2 decades, she has given seminars and workshops for a range of Auckland Catholic diocesan purposes, from music and liturgy to exploring the Bible in parishes. She has worked as a professional musician in Melbourne, Australia, Vienna, Austria, Norrköping, Sweden, and Auckland, Aotearoa, New Zealand. She says, sailing with the wind behind me in a P-class as a child and a nosediving from the Banks Peninsula heads back into Akaroa Harbor put the fear of God in me. Other major experiences in her life are the Ignatian 30-day retreat and 4 years in Japan, in Tokyo and Hiroshima. For time out, she enjoys tramping, kayaking, and cycling. Creating human communities and care of the earth, air, and waterways for future generations are an ongoing concern for her. Tenakwe, Dr. Sarah, and thank you so much for being with us here this evening.
Thank you. Good evening to you all linked into this webinar tonight. It is a privilege to be invited to speak. About 2 months ago, I was asked to join this forum. Without knowing who would attend, but thinking of people before me with an open spirit, I prepared this talk. I present perspectives on a passage often known as the sacrifice of Isaac and referenced as Genesis 22. I speak from a Christian stance, and more specifically from the Roman Catholic tradition, which is the tradition I live in. I proceed using a format of 4 questions and 4 responses. Question 1, where or how do Catholics learn about Abraham and Isaac? It is probably through hearing the biblical reading on Abraham and Isaac at a Sunday service we call Mass. The service of the Mass has 2 parts, Liturgy of the Word and Liturgy of the Eucharist, a Greek word meaning thanksgiving. Both parts of the Mass need to be addressed for different reasons. The first part of the Mass consists of 4 readings in English from the Bible. Firstly, a reading from what we call the Old Testament. Secondly, the reading of a psalm, a form of religious poetry from the Old Testament. The psalm is chanted as a response to the Old Testament reading. Thirdly, readings then draw from what we call the New Testament. The third reading is generally a letter to one of the early Christian communities of the Greco-Roman world in the 1st century Common Era. Fourthly, the high point of all the readings is a passage from one of the 4 Gospels, the central sources relating the sayings, acts, and life of Jesus Christ. One could say what the Torah is for the Jewish people, the Gospels are for traditional or Orthodox Christian communities. The entire Bible cannot be read every year on Sundays, so a system developed whereby selected passages from the Bible are read over a 3-year Sunday cycle. All 4 Gospels are read nearly in their entirety over the 3-year Sunday cycle. In general, the Old Testament reading foreshadows or prefigures the Gospel passage. This point is important as there is a thematic link between the first reading, the Old Testament reading, and the last reading from a Gospel, the highlight of all the readings, as the Gospels focus on the life of Christ. The passage on Abraham and Isaac, Genesis 22, is doubly important as it is not only heard on a Sunday once every 3 years, but it is also heard every year at the most important liturgy of the Church's year, the Easter Vigil. At the Easter Vigil, 7 Old Testament readings are prescribed, though in reality, rarely are all 7 readings read. The first Old Testament reading is the creation of the world in 7 days, Genesis 1. The second reading is Genesis 22, the sacrifice of Isaac. The third reading is the deliverance from Egypt, also known as crossing through the Red Sea, Exodus 14. The 7 biblical readings are chosen to remind us of God's saving actions through the people of Israel, the history and people of Jesus. For Christians, the climax is the gospel reading, which tells of God's ultimate saving action, the rising of Christ from the dead, thereby conquering death. In Catholic tradition, Genesis 22 is an obligatory text, a must-know text, as it relates a very significant act of God. Therefore, it is read every year at the Easter Vigil. Every 3rd year, when Genesis 22 is read on a Sunday, it is coupled with a passage from the Gospel of Mark. In Mark 9, Christ makes the second of 3 predictions about his impending death and rising. I said before that the Old Testament passage is chosen to elucidate the Gospel reading. The classic way to describe this link is typology, meaning that a type or some motif is in common. Genesis 22 and Mark 9 have motifs of impending death, yet surprisingly, life in common. In short, in the liturgical practice of the Catholic Church, Genesis 22 is read as a highly significant text, 1, relating part of the history of salvation, and 2, foreshadowing Jesus' impending death, followed by some form of life after death. Now, addressing the second part of the Sunday service of the Mass, the priest has to choose one of 4 long standard prayers. If the first of these 4 standard prayers is chosen, indirect reference is made to Genesis 22 with the words, "As you were pleased to accept the gifts of your servant Abel the just, the sacrifice of Abraham, our father in faith, and the offering of your high priest Melchizedek, a holy sacrifice, a spotless victim." The words, "the sacrifice of Abraham, our father in faith," are spoken at a stage in the ritual proceedings when we, as the congregation, via the priest, want God to accept our offerings. To encourage God to receive the offerings, we remind God that in the past, the gifts of 3 significant ancestors of Jesus, Abel, Abraham, and Melchizedek, were acceptable. In the context of offerings and gifts, the new offering, Jesus Christ, is spoken of as a pure victim, a holy victim, a spotless victim, the holy bread of eternal life, and the chalice of everlasting salvation. This is obviously liturgical language with a long list, 6 titles, of attributes that are applied to Christ. As participants in the ritual, we engage more with the body and the spirit than the intellectual mind. The ritual can be likened to a drama into which a participant is drawn and engages in a process. You could say Catholic tradition appropriates the story of the sacrifice of Isaac and gives it a new interpretation when the first Eucharistic prayer is prayed at Mass. Isaac is remembered regularly in our faith. Question 2. How do Catholics learn about persons and events such as the sacrifice of Isaac mentioned in the texts of our liturgies? We generally learn through some form of Bible study. One way is via a Bible with commentaries. From about 1960 on, study Bibles evolved in the Catholic context. For example, the study edition of the Jerusalem Bible informed and inspired many Catholics after Vatican II. Study Bibles have the biblical text printed on the upper part of each page, beside which are printed often cross-references to other biblical passages, and below at the bottom, the biblical texts pertinent to the as commentary pertinent to the biblical text, and these are printed to facilitate understanding. Study Bibles often contain essays on biblical topics such as historical context or literary genre types of writing, and include maps and glossaries, definitions of what words mean. In recent years, the study edition of the New Revised Jerusalem Bible is used in countries somehow allied with the British Commonwealth, and the Catholic Study Bible is used in North America. For your interest, I teach my course at the Catholic Theological College using the New Oxford Annotated Bible, New Revised Standard Version. This English translation of the Hebrew and Greek texts is ecumenically accepted and regarded as being as close as viable to the Hebrew and Greek texts. Another form of Bible study is through study groups and parishes. Today, some parishes have groups where each week or each month, parishioners come together to read and reflect on the Sunday biblical texts. Question 3. How do Bible editions influence our understanding? Most editors of Bibles in the Christian context add titles to the biblical text. The titles are not in the Hebrew and Greek manuscripts. The titles are a means of reference, yet can vary from Bible to Bible. They function like a summary of a biblical passage or even a mnemonic. That is, they assist recall of the contents of a passage. The titles are revealing as they reflect traditional interpretations of a text. For example, the 1990 Nelson Nashville edition of the Bible titles Genesis 22, The Command to Sacrifice Isaac. The previously mentioned Revised New Jerusalem Bible 2019 has the title Abraham's Sacrifice. A guide for people rostered to read at Sunday services, Break Open the Word, starts, the story of Abraham's testing of God takes us to the brink. My Sunday Missal of 1975 has the title, The Sacrifice of Abraham, Our Father in Faith. I give you all these examples because they show 2 recurring ways that Genesis 22 is summarized or interpreted, namely as a story about the sacrifice of Isaac and or as a story about the testing of Abraham's faith. Interestingly, in the Hebrew text, the word sacrifice, zebach, is not used. The word olah appears in Genesis 22. It's translated, olah is translated as Holocaust, pre-Vatican II, that is before 1965, or as burnt offering in post-Vatican II translations. Ola is never transliterated as sacrifice. So we can ask, where then does the idea of sacrifice come from? In the Christian context, I think it is on an associative level. Words in the biblical text such as offering, fire, and knife suggest sacrifice. Question 4. Are there other reasons for associating Genesis 22 with sacrifice? Yes, iconography. In the Christian context, biblical stories are often imbued through the visual arts. Standard elements of the Genesis 22 story are a bearded older man, Abraham, and a younger boy, often bare-chested, Isaac. Props are an altar, sometimes with firewood. On the side, a bush may be depicted, perhaps with a ram caught in it. Abraham holds a knife in his hand, and an intermediary, such as an angel, restrains the hand holding the knife. It is a very dramatic scene that lends itself to visual portrayal. It is easier to portray Abraham and Isaac as a sacrificial scene than as a scene about faith. Sacrifice allows physical elements such as a knife to be shown, an intention through ritual gesture. It is harder to show intangibles such as testing or faith or trust. In works of art on the sacrifice of Isaac, what can be seen on the surface is an entry, the start of a journey into an interior understanding of the events depicted on the surface. We ponder what Abraham must have felt when God told him to offer his son as a burnt offering. Abraham obeys God, but we are invited to fill in the gaps of the text, that which is not said, with all the questioning or dispute that Abraham probably had with God. Isaac knows an offering is to be made and wonders where the offering is. He asks, "Where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" When Isaac is bound to the pyre, what must he have felt? The incomprehensibility of the commands and scene draw us away from normal earthly life into another dimension of understanding. I think that like experiencing the Catholic Eucharist, the exterior picture of the sacrifice of Isaac draws us into an interior challenge. We have the chance to reflect on another dimension of life. We have to leave a seemingly controllable cerebral understanding or consciousness, and we are called to lose control and enter a realm of other dimensions. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sarah. Thank you for all what you have shared with us. Just reminding everyone that if you have got any question as we go, could you please add it to the Q&A question and answer section? I can see that we have got some questions already, so we will leave that after, for the Q&A section following the presentation from Sheikh Ra'fat Najm. I have the privilege to introduce Brother Ra'fat. Sheikh Ra'fat is a Muslim scholar who studied Islamic studies at Al-Azhar University and has a BA in Law and Islamic Law, Cairo, Egypt. He's a New Zealand citizen from an Arab descent, Egyptian. He has lived in New Zealand since 1997. He has been working as the Muslim advisor at AUT University's students and staff since 2007, a member of the Spirituality Steering Group. He also co-lectured a paper titled Spirituality, Health, and Well-Being. He has been a member of the AUT University Ethics Committee for 6 years, during which he has reviewed over 100 master and PhD theses in different fields. He has attended many conferences inside and outside New Zealand that has been dealing with diverse issues in the area of Islam and the wider community's religions. He has been delivering lectures, workshops, and forums nationally and internationally. Some of the countries he has lectured in are Australia and the UK. He also co-authored a paper on an American periodical that highlights the spirituality and food security from an Islamic perspective. Some of his ideas of interest are ethics, youth work, interfaith, and societal cohesion. Welcome, brother. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Let me start by saying peace be upon you all. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure to be amongst you here, even though I have been struggling with my health lately, and I just was admitted out of hospital just yesterday. But let me hope that I would be able to highlight the topic which I have prepared well before the sickness. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it is very important for us in New Zealand and the whole world to establish strong relationships between different religions. Interreligious dialogue is not luxury, it's a necessity in a troubled world. So thanks to the PIF for such a project. Wish them all the best. I would like to just say that I am going to highlight the topic and deal with it from a perspective as well over 3 points. The first one, introduction to the Quran. The second one is Isaac in the Quran, or Sayyidina Ishaq, and the word Sayyidina means master, and we Muslims usually say that word before the name of a prophet or a great man. So when I say Sayyidina, I would refer to the word in English master, that would include Abraham, Isaac, Muhammad, and etc. The third point, I would try to just tackle the question how our Quran reading affects our faith or my faith life. The first point, the introduction into scripture, which is the Quran. We as Muslims believe that the Quran was orally revealed to Prophet Muhammad by Allah or God through the angel Gabriel or Jibril. And the Quran has been revealed over a period of some 23 years, beginning in the month of Ramadan. So we believe that the Quran has revealed from the heaven to the earth in Ramadan. And when Prophet Muhammad was 40 years old, he started to receive the revelation, starting with the word read. Read, O Muhammad, in the name of your God, read. Read the world, read the universe. And when you read in the name of your God. And that concluded in the year 632, roughly, the year of the death of the Prophet. The word Quran appears about 70 times in the Quran itself, assuming various meanings. It is a verbal noun, or what we call an Arabic masdar, of the Arabic verb qara'a, meaning he reads or he recited. So the Quran is about recitation. Muslims, or we as Muslims, believe that the Quran to be Allah's or God's final revelation to humanity. Indeed, we believe in the Torah, we believe in the Gospel, we believe that the Torah, if Torah is known as the Old Testament, the Gospel is known as New Testament, the Quran would be the last testament. Continuation of the revelation of God. So God is not going to say that, this is not my word. We treat the word of Allah or God as the word of Allah, regardless to whom it has been revealed. But after all, Muslims believe that the Quran has not been sent to specific people in a specific place. Actually, they believe that the Quran has been revealed to all humanity throughout all time, summarizing the books before it, including the Torah and Injil, or Torah and the Gospels, including the scriptures sent to David, Sayyidina David or Sayyidina Dawood alayhi salam, and it would include indeed the scriptures sent to Sayyidina Ibrahim or Abraham. By the way, there is a recitation in the Quran, Ibrahim and Abram. But the famous one is Ibrahim. So we as Muslims believe that the Quran to be Allah's final revelation to humanity, a work of divine guidance, hidayah, revealed to Sayyidina Muhammad, Prophet Muhammad, through the angel Jibril or Gabriel. The Islamic tradition relates that Sayyidina Muhammad received the first revelation in a cave of Hira. This cave is about 5-6 kilometers away from Kaaba, or in Mecca, and it's a very very interesting mountain. The cave on the top of that mountain, and when I stood the first time in front of the mountain, I felt that awe. Climbed it, took about like 1 hour and a half, 2 hours. So I know that Sarah is into hiking. I'm sure that she would love to do this. It was amazing experience, because again, and that relates to the question how the Quran reading affects our faith life when the Quran reading is joined or has been brought with experiencing the places the Prophet has been through. The field, the understanding, and the application becomes quite interesting. So the Prophet in that cave of Hira received the first revelation, and that cave is in isolated retreat into the mountains of Mecca. Thereafter, the Prophet received revelations over a period of 23 years, 13 in Mecca and 10 in Medina. It is the Quran organized in 114 chapters. We believe that this is again the name of the chapters, where they are, all has been guided by God through the angel Jibril to Prophet Muhammad. And we have 30 parts. The 114 chapters are in the scripture, included in another way of 30 parts. Usually in Ramadan, we keep reciting a part every night, a tradition or a continuation from the time of Prophet Muhammad, or after Prophet Muhammad, at the time of Sayyidina Umar ibn al-Khattab. So this is a quick introduction, but yet I need to tackle the question about ways of reading the scripture, which I have seen it on the board. The basic guideline on how to study the Quran has been mentioned in the Quran, in addition to the tradition of Prophet Muhammad. We will find this in a passage in the chapter, Bani Israel, or the Israelites. The first, and I would give later more detail about the numbers. The first way in the methodology of reading the Quran through the Quran is to avoid hasty approach. So the Quran contains multiple meanings. It's a bit vague sometimes. Figurative messages apart from clear messages. Also the revelation, and this is mentioned in the Quran chapter 3, verse 7. Also the revelation and clarification of its divine messages in individual and collective human mind is a process of unfolding similar to evolution. And this is again mentioned in the same chapter 3, verse 6 to 7, which is slow and gradual. And the Quran we have unfolded step by step. And we have been sending it down by gradual descent. And this is mentioned in chapter 2, verse 23, etc. That is why, while reading the Quran, one must avoid hasty approach that jumps into uncertain deductions inferred from unverified propositions. The Quran says, man has been too hasty. وَكَانَ الْإِنسَانُ عَجُولًا. Whoever seeks that which hastens away, we hasten for him what he wishes. This is chapter 17. And in this chapter 17, around the verses 11 forward, is talking about the methodology of understanding and reading the Quran in the Quran. So avoiding a hasty approach. Number 2, studying the Quran holistically as an interconnected whole. We cannot separate the Quran when dealing with different topics. The Quran is not put in chronological order. Starting with introduction, it's unlike the human written books. The Quran, and this is one of its miraculous ways that it has been put in that way. The study of the Quran must be holistically as an interconnected whole. As the Quran is an integrated whole, it is essential in order to understand it correctly to apply a holistic or all-inclusive methodology while studying it instead of a detached and partial approach. And the Quran says, and whoever seeks the end, the akhirah, ultimate, and strive for it with the striving. The number 3, this is in regards to acknowledging the end or the akhirah or the whole or the ultimate. So number 1, we shouldn't be hasty. Number 2, we need to read the Quran in a holistic way. Number 3, we need to acknowledge then the effort is appreciated, and certainly the end, the whole, the ultimate is higher in degrees and greater in excellence. And when you read the Quran says in the chapter 17, Surah Al-Isra, or Bani Israel, the Israelites, we place, when you read the Quran says, we place between you and those who do not acknowledge the end, the whole, the ultimate, the hereafter. We place between you and those who don't believe in the hereafter an invisible barrier. So again, acknowledging the hereafter would enable us to understand the Quran better. So through the Quranic process called tafsir, interactive explanation, through various interconnected aspects of its interactive message, where verses in one place explain, supplement, clarify, or throw more light on verses in other places, and vice versa. So you might read something in the chapter opening, the opening of the Quran, Al-Fatiha, and then you find that verse number 5, and then you find the interpretation of this verse has been spread throughout the Quran. And this is when we get into more analysis, and that leaves a space for our mind to work in the wonders of the Quran and not to be lazy in finding the meanings. It opens up a way for the mind to work rather than make it inactive. Number 4, the methodology number 4 is to use scientific data and inductive logic rather than blind following. And you find this in the Quran in chapter 17, verse 11, chapter 5, verse 104, 105. While reading the Quran, one must avoid blind following of inherited traditions and mechanical deduction from ready-made premises. And this is where culture could influence the interpretation of the Holy Book. The Quran says, "Follow not anything of which you have no knowledge." Rather, one must personally question, analyze, and verify, along with persistent use of inductive logic founded on sensory data and scientific information. We need to remember the Quran has been revealed in Arabic. So if someone is not mastering the language, he or she won't be able to follow such methodology. So, and again, we find that as Muslim even though we have different and various languages, we all recite the Quran in Arabic, and we ask God in the same language, and that indicate the unity of the nation and indicate the unity of God or the Creator. So again, we don't have many versions. It's one version. It's in Arabic. This is the only one accepted. Regardless which sect of Muslims, you won't find differences. It's exactly the same. I'm aware of the time. I have 5 minutes. Rather, one must personally question and analyze and verify, along with persistent use of inductive logic founded on sensory data and scientific information. The Quran says the hearing and the sama wal basara wal fuada kullu dhalika kana anhu mas'ula, the hearing and the sight and the sense, all those will be questioned about it. This is 8:22:7:179. Number 5, the tradition of the Prophet is very important, as the Prophet, Sayyidina Muhammad, is the role model. So again, this is taken in consideration, and it is spreaded over all the Quran that Allah has revealed the Quran, and along with the Quran, the Sunnah of Sayyidina Muhammad. The Sunnah means the way. And this is the way of Rasulullah, the way of Prophet Muhammad in acting with different situations. So another way of seeking the meaning of the Quran is the tradition of Prophet Muhammad. Isaac in the Quran. Sayyidina Ishaq or Sayyidina Isaac is mentioned 15 times by name in the Quran, often with his father and his son, Yaqub, Sayyidina Yaqub or Jacob, or Israel, as it came into tradition rather than the Quran itself. The Quran states that Ibrahim or Sayyidina Ibrahim received good tidings of Isaac as a prophet of the righteous. The Quran describes him, and that God blessed them both. This is 37 chapter, verse 112. And we give him glad tidings of Isaac, a prophet from among the righteous, and we blessed him and Isaac. And among their progeny are the virtuous and those who clearly wrong themselves. So again, the progeny of Isaac and Abraham, and including in other places of Ishmael, are not perfect. There are some of them are good, and others has clearly wronged themselves. In a fuller description, when angels came to Ibrahim to tell him, Sayyidina Ibrahim, to tell him of the future punishment to be imposed on Sodom and Gomorrah, his wife, again, this is not mentioned in the Quran, again, the name of the tribes or the people. His wife, again, Sarah, not mentioned in the Quran with the name. The Quran is not busy with many names and many dates and the years. The Quran has more focus on the big events and the lessons that we can gain and learn from it. And it is further explained that this event will take place despite Abraham and Sarah's old age. Several verses speak of Isaac as a gift to Abraham, Sayyidina Ibrahim. Chapter 6, verses 84. Adds that Allah or God made prophethood and the book to be amongst his offspring, which has been interpreted to refer to Abraham's two prophetic sons, his prophetic grandson Jacob and his prophetic grandson Joseph. In the Quran, it later narrates that Abraham, or Sayyidina Ibrahim, also praised God for giving him Ishmael and Isaac in his old age. Elsewhere in the Quran, Isaac is mentioned in lists. Joseph follows the religion of his forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And no mention of Ishmael in this verse, because again, there is no relation directly between Joseph and Ishmael, but Ishmael would be considered as an uncle or great uncle to him, and speaks of God's favor to them. The Quran says, Jacob's son all testify their faith and promise to worship the God that their forefathers, Abraham, Ishmael, and Isaac worshipped. So again, the mention of all. So Isaac has been mentioned in many places in the Quran with Ishmael, given that they were brothers. In some other places, Ishmael is not mentioned when it is to do with Isaac and his offsprings, Jacob or Joseph, etc. And the Quran commands Muslims to believe the revelation that were given to Abraham, Sayyidina Ibrahim, Ishmael, Sayyidina Ismail, Isaac, Sayyidina Ishaq, Jacob, Sayyidina Yaqub, and the patriarch. So again, the patriarchs. So we believe in all. Last but not least, the Quran doesn't mention who is the one who to be sacrificed by name, but Muslims in general believe it's Ishmael, and there is, because of the prophetic tradition of Sayyidina Muhammad, the story of the sacrifice itself is more to do about getting rid of our wrong or our bad temptation, negative temptation, making sure that the love of God comes first. The last but not least, how our Quran reading affect our faith life. The Quran is a guide for us. So our life is impacted hugely by reading the Quran. But again, once again, the Quran has various ways of interpretation. And following the methodology I have mentioned beforehand is the guideline to be able to apply the right thing to our life to live as better Muslims and better human. Thank you very much.
Thank you, brother. Jazakallah khair for your contribution. And thanks to all our panelists and speakers. It's time for questions and answers. Actually, under the questions section, I've got a question by Tanner. What do 3 books say about reading their scriptures? Thank you. Again, what do 3 books say about reading their scriptures?
May I ask the question, the brother or sister who asked it to elaborate a bit? I understood it in a way, what is the methodology of reading the scripture itself? But it's better to get it from the mouth of the horse.
True. Is there any elaboration? While we're waiting for the elaboration on that particular question, hopefully, we've got some messages of wishing you, Brother Rafat, to get well soon. And sorry to hear that you have been unwell. So it's thank you messages to the panelists and also to the organizer, the Pearl of the Islands, for organizing this webinar. And there is also a request here that there is, well, I will read that, start from the beginning. Joe from Auckland. I hope after this introductory conversation, there will be a series of a better appreciation and contextualization of the sacred story and reading the scriptures. We need this as we journey together for the betterment of the gift of life and our planet Earth. Thank you so much. Yes.
I will just, because I'm also mentioned in that message, if I may just elaborate really shortly. Thank you so much, Joe, for that question. And of course, this is the 3rd annual lecture that Pearl of the Islands, Beth Shalom, and Holy Trinity Cathedral together are organizing, because every year we wish to bring together in this Abrahamic context certain issues that seem really of great importance. And of course, in 2019, matter of social justice was really important after the tragedy of Christchurch. Last year there was, well, this is the talk of this year too. Last year we had a lot of talk about care for creation and protection of the environment. And this year we wanted to bring scriptures and our different approaches to the scriptures in. So it's an ongoing journey on which we are traveling, and it's really, really exciting. And it's whenever speakers come from different backgrounds, I think we all get really enriched. So same experience that Joe had, we experience really every time. So thank you really to all.
Indeed, and this actually reiterate the importance of the interfaith dialogue and the interfaith work, and the work that the three organizations represented here have been putting towards, educating the general public about the importance of the interfaith dialogue and the content that's been provided. I have a question here by Ross and Grace. Abraham and Ishmael were both circumcised on the same day before God. This would indicate they both worship the same God. Comment, please. Who would like to comment here from our panelists, please?
I can talk briefly about the circumcision, and what happened was that when Abram, as he was called when he was born, entered into the covenant with God, at that stage, at the age of 99 now, Ishmael at the time was 13 years old. So when Abraham entered into the covenant, he and all of his offspring were going to be circumcised. So Ishmael was only 13 at the time, and Abraham would have organized for himself and Ishmael to be circumcised at that time in accordance with his covenant. And very much so, I see that there is no doubt that they worshipped the same God, that they worshipped one God, and it was the God with which Abraham had entered into the covenant for the circumcision. So it seems as though there's no doubt there whatsoever. The way I see it, frankly, is that we are all children of Abraham. We may call God by different names and so on, but it is one and the same God that we worship.
If I may add, I couldn't hear Sister May.
Oh, please. Yeah.
The Quran is not mentioning or is not talking about the circumcision of the prophets. Yet Ishmael is in the Quran is one of the greatest prophets, and Isaac as well. And from their offspring or progeny came big nations to guide, and indeed they worship the same God. But yet the Quran, when the Quran speaks about the offsprings or the progeny, as I've mentioned, is not saying that the progeny must be perfect. Some of them are good and some are bad. But yet the great prophet Abraham, the great prophet Ishmael have been worshipping same God. Ishmael has been left with the orders of God in a desert of Mecca with his own mother, Hagar, and that was a great test for the prophet as a baby, great test for his mother, great test for the father as well, because he was commanded to leave them. God will take care of them. Yes, he believed in God, but it is that humanity within him that he felt that feeling until he was going away and leaving Hagar. in the place, she said, she called him, and this is in tradition, not in the Quran. "Oh, Abraham, how come you leaving us? Is that the order of God?" He said, "Yes, it is the order of God to leave you and Ishmael in here." She said to him and replied, "If this is the order of God, then God will never make us go astray or be lost." Thank you.
Jazakallah khair. Dr. Sarah, any thing to add here, please?
Sorry, you need to unmute.
Unmute, yeah.
You're on mute, sorry.
When I heard the question, it seemed to me it was focusing on the one God, or the sense of one bigger sense of the divine. It seems to me tonight there are different ways to this one God, and we have different traditions. So I wonder if this is the richness. Our challenge is to accept that we tend to grow up being more comfortable in the traditional, the ways that we've grown up in. Sometimes we convert, but in general we continue the traditions of our families. So I wonder. I was very interested when Sheikh Rafat was talking about, if I understand correctly, reading the Quran, the part of the Quran within a whole. I mean, is one of our challenges that we read our scriptures. We don't have to believe them the same way, but we read them as one big whole. So there are many ways to the one great God.
Thank you. We have another question from Marta Cullen. Why are we Catholics, one, not learning to read Arabic and Hebrew so we can learn through reading Torah, Quran, and Bible all? I know some Hebrew, but not Arabic.
Well, you could also ask, why don't Catholics learn to read Greek? Because our New Testament's written in Greek. I teach at the Catholic Theological College, and unfortunately we don't offer Greek, and neither do we offer Hebrew. It is easier to learn Greek because many of the words are related to our Greco-Roman English language. Hebrew takes, I think, great effort to learn. And if I'm honest with you, I read Hebrew using Bible software. If I was 20 years old and I could start at the beginning again, I would love to learn Hebrew so I could read you the Hebrew text out loud, translate it, and discuss the root and the meanings of the words. I'm sorry, I can't do it, but it would be something I would love to be able to do.
Thank you. Any other comment from the panelists, please? Well, the comment again from Marta Cullen, I dislike Greek for reading, only the New Testament. So that's a comment. I'm just checking if we have any other question. Yep. Okay. So if we don't have any questions, Brother Sahib, please help me if there is any question I couldn't see in the chat or under the Q&A section. I think we've covered them all. And this comes to the...
I think
yes,
we haven't. Yeah, we haven't. Just again, another comment, and yeah, we haven't any questions now.
Yep, thank you. So then it's time to maybe to close this webinar by passing all the thanks and the gratitude to our speakers on behalf of the three organizations, Beth Shalom, Pearl of the Island, Holy Trinity Cathedral. We would like to thank you all for your contributions. Thank you all for the wisdom, for the knowledge, for the time, actually, even before all of that. In this world of uncertainty, world of sharing things via Zoom and Teams, it's been really difficult to many people, and they've been going through Zoom fatigue. However, we thank you. We thank you for your time, your wisdom, your knowledge. And Paul Wilton, Dr. Sarah Hart, Sheikh Ra'fat Najm, thank you for being with us today. Also, Naomi, Ivetsa, thank you for the introductions. Brother Sahib, thank you for the organization. And I know that we were supposed to be meeting in person. However, again, this is the way how we all adapt with the situation to keep everyone safe and to keep Aotearoa, New Zealand safe. But I know that Brother Sahib wanted to be offering some gifts to the panelists as a show of appreciation. However, he shared with me that he will be sending those gifts to your home addresses, and he will be in touch if he hasn't been to collect those addresses. At last, I would say it's been really a privilege for me to take part in this webinar as a facilitator. And I hope that this is one webinar of a series of webinars under the project of Children of Abraham, and that I will be able to be a co-host again sometime in the near future. If you allow me, I would like to close this meeting by a dua, asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to support us all as we go through this journey. We're all together, we're all human beings, and we are together on this boat, especially around this time of uncertainty. So go well and stay well. And I will close with a karakia. Kia tau to rangi marie, ke ronga inga iwi o te o. Let your peace reign on all the people of the world. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Peace be upon all of you, and shalom.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks to you.
Thank you very much.